Today, it's the magical canvas of projective coaching. And in general, in coaching, we're often forced, perhaps through training or through people's expectations, to limit ourselves to a very cognitive conversation. And our experience of life, our fears, our hopes, our dreams, can't necessarily be defined in that limited way. And when we can't, or we won't put an experience into words, we need other methods to tap into the complex and the diverse ways that the human mind weaves together this rich tapestry of life. When we give our clients a blank canvas, they will create a self-portrait. And through that projected representation, we expand the coaching conversation into a coaching relationship. It becomes a shared creation. So in this session, we're going to see just a glimpse of this creative sharing and learn something of the psychology behind projective coaching and practice two very simple projective techniques that you can use in a variety of ways with your individual and group clients. Now, because of the time that we've got available today, we're only going to practice them for 5 minutes each way, but you can appreciate you could use the same techniques over an entire session, or actually even to run over multiple sessions over a continuing conversation, which is often a lovely thing to do with a client as their story develops and unfolds. You can also join my mailing list, and on my mailing list you'll get very irregular ideas and resources to help you develop your coaching practice. And you can find out more about projective coaching. There is a book with lots of colourful, where I can't find the colourful bits now. Oh, there we go. So it's a full colour book, lots of ideas, lots of techniques, lots of practical stuff in there, and there are 5 sets of cards that you can use with the book, but you can use any pictures you like for the image based exercises. You can cut pictures out of magazines, do whatever you like for those. And there's an online image generator tool that we'll be using today as well, so you can see that. So you can find out more on that page about what projective coaching is and what it encompasses, so do have a look at that following the session. And what I'd like you to do to start with is I would like you to have a look at these images and think about what they mean to you. It's very easy to look at those pictures and think that you know what they are, to think, oh, that is a picture of. What we very naturally do is we look through the image, we look through the cartoon, the representation, and we describe the thing that is beyond it. We describe it as if it's a real object or a real experience. So it's very easy to look at images like this and think that you know what they are and to label them in that way. We might still find differences in what people focus on and how they describe an image. So if you consider, as you were in the previous session, if you would consider how the image makes you feel, then we'd expect a much greater variety of responses. If I said to you all, describe the image on the left, what is it? You might pretty much all describe it in a very similar way. But if I ask you what it means to you, how you feel about it, then we can expect the answers to be very different. So we know that your interpretation, even of an image like this, or in fact your interpretation of any sensory experience, we're working with images because we're somewhat constrained by this medium that we're communicating through. But we could be working with sounds, music, touch, taste, smells, anything. So the interpretation of any sensory experience is entirely subjective, and it's very easy to forget that when we are used to labelling in the world in such a seemingly objective way. And when we're working with people in organisations, and an organisation has its own culture and has its own language, it's very easy for people to mistake that language and those symbols for reality. So we know that the interpretation of any sensory experience is subjective, and if you've never seen these images before, you might still think that you've seen something similar. You've seen, I've seen a picture like that, because your brain generalizes your life experience, and you so that you can recognize things that you haven't seen before. You can recognize a door and know what to do with a door to get through it, even if you've never been to that particular door before, because your brain is constantly comparing and generalizing your life experiences. So you can look at these images separately, or you can begin to connect them together to form a story. And you might consider what story these images suggest to you and how that's significant in your own life. Now, if I change to this set of images, an abstract or a distorted image it's harder to define, it's harder to get a handle on and say what it is. So the subjective projection becomes much more obvious. And yet you might still be trying to figure out what the picture is supposed to be, or what it was that I took a photo of, or what was going on in the mind of the artist, rather than realizing that what you're actually looking at is a self-portrait, in that you are seeing what you expect to see based on your past experience and projected through the filter of how you're feeling right now. So when we make an image more abstract, we provide fewer clues to help you navigate, and therefore those navigation points have to come from inside the client. You see colours, you see some shapes which look familiar, you imagine what might be going on, you try to figure out what it's a picture of. So you're working through your own library of life experiences, you're trying to find something that fits, or even you're making something fit. And the colours and the shapes might suggest movement, and you might consider how that relates to an emotional experience which is significant to you. Now, the most abstract image of all is, of course, the absence of an image. Now it becomes even more obvious that whatever you're seeing must have been placed there by you, and your intentions, your motivations, your emotions all become very valuable topics to explore within a conversation. So, based on that, we're going to do a very, very simple exercise to begin with. And you're going to be working in pairs for this one. And we're going to go to the Projective image generator, which is going to show you 3 images. And you can see I've put in the yellow box some very simple instructions and questions for you for the exercise. So what I'm going to ask you to do is you're going to work in pairs. You're going to think of an area of your life or work that you'd like to explore, that you'd be interested in talking about, that you would feel happy to talk about for 5 minutes today, that you'd feel safe talking about. And as I said earlier, ultimately you'll only ever share what you want to share anyway, regardless of what the coach asks you. So you're going to get this tool up on your computer, and in pairs you're going to then choose who goes first. Obviously, you're going to click on this. Can I have some new images, please? That's going to give you 3 new images, and there are some instructions down here in the yellow box. Just a very, very simple projective exercise just to get us started and getting an idea of what sort of transpires and some of the odd ways in which we can use projective techniques. And then when you've done that, that'll be 10 minutes, we'll come back and I'll give you some background on the psychology behind projective coaching and how it might work. So, okay, welcome back, thank you. Now, I know that 5 minutes isn't long, and you could have, from the conversations that I dipped into and heard bits of, you could carry on talking for an hour at least on that subject. But what was really fascinating was hearing really great questions and insights coming out in a very, very short time, in a very simple exercise. And how interesting it is to focus on what isn't there and what a person would dismiss as least relevant and what comes from that. So there's information to be found in all of our experience of life, and really this is the basis of what projective coaching and projective psychology is all about, that we can't separate the observer from the observation. And in fact there are some physicists now who are starting to think that the universe only exists because we can see it. To put a very complex theory into a nutshell, but basically that the role of the observer, even Einstein knew that the role of observer in his theory of relativity was part of the observation, that they're inseparable. And yet, as I said earlier, when we put people together in groups and organisations, we create this culture and a language and a set of rules and a set of, I'm sure in your own language you can think of jargon and you can think of cultural rules which differentiate your workplace from others that you've experienced. And so we create these sorts of bubbles and subjective realities, and we expect everybody to understand what's going on and understand what we mean by a certain symbol or a certain gesture or a certain facial expression and so on. But we can't separate the observer from the observation, and that's very, very critical in coaching. And I think you can take the view that in coaching you've got to distance yourself and separate yourself and be objective and non-directive and so on. Or you can take the view that you can't not be, as a human being, you cannot be separated from the coaching conversation. And therefore, one of the really valuable things I find about projective coaching is by making your own subjectivity obvious, you can then choose to discount it. So when your partner said, oh, this image makes me feel X, or makes me think of whatever, or reminds me of whatever, and you thought to yourself, oh, that's not how it is to me, that difference is bringing your subjectivity to the surface. If it wasn't for that, if we were having what we thought was a very logical cognitive conversation, it would be very easy for the client to say something and for us to think, okay, well, I know what they mean by that, so I don't need to ask any more questions. So it's a really useful way to reveal that on both sides. Now, we can use, as I said earlier, any sensory system. Visual techniques tend to be the most flexible, but we could use music, poetry, touch, smell, taste, anything that you can imagine. There are some categories and examples of projective techniques. You'll find this list on the website, so no need to frantically write down what I'm saying here. The first is associative techniques. In an associative technique, we use a particular stimulus to elicit something from the client's mind. The images you just looked at, they were examples of associative techniques. In just what does the image remind you of as a single image, that would make it an associative technique. The Rorschach test is probably the most well known because it's been in lots of movies and media and so on, even though I don't know if any of you have ever actually seen one for real, but you've probably seen it in movies and on TV. Completion techniques are techniques in which the client completes maybe a sentence or a drawing. Perhaps they might add an ending to a question or a caption to an image. There's a favourite question of coaches. What question would you like me to ask you right now? Or my preference, which is, what question would you hate me to ask you right now? That's a completion technique. That is a completion projective technique, because we're saying, here's a question, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. The question obviously then comes from the client, and they're projecting whatever's going on for them into the conversation. It could be adding a caption to an image. There's constructive techniques where the client creates something, maybe a drawing, a sculpture, a story. This is very popular in art therapy. And there's minimal initial framing, so nothing more than a blank canvas or the materials that are provided, sometimes not even that. There's a technique, I think there's a link to a video on the page that I've shared with you that shows a technique called the mandala in action. And the mandala is a beautiful technique, very complex. It can easily run for an hour's session, or even the interpretation can run over multiple sessions. And it's a really wonderful process where the client's sort of in a reality sort of unfolds itself onto the paper. So the client draws, the coach helps the client to interpret the symbols that they've drawn to reveal hidden information and connections. And as I say, I think I've shared a link to a video that shows that one in action. There are ordering techniques in which the client chooses objects or something from a group, maybe a group of pictures or words or statements, other fragments of information, puts them together in a particular order or sequence. So it could be ordering most to least, or biggest to smallest, or most relevant to least relevant, that sort of thing. Or put them into an order, a story of something in their career journey, something like that. And there's an element of that within the three images that I showed you earlier. The idea of these three images telling a story that you might connect together. There are expressive techniques in which the client organises a stimulus into an expressive process, such as role-playing or an improvised story. And masks and puppets are used this way a lot. You've probably seen that at some point, maybe when you were at school. So you're given something to wear, a hat to put on, you take on a particular character. Edward de Bono's Six Thinking Hats is an example of an expressive technique, because you put on the black hat, and now you're going to be critical and negative, and you're going to personify that role. So that's an expressive projective technique. And there's a sixth category, which I think isn't in the sort of projective psychology canon, which is relational techniques. And this is where a client organises a set of elements within a 2 or a 3-dimensional space. This would include, there's a complex technique called the untangler, where the client is expressing in language and then organising that language within a 2 or even a 3-dimensional space, in order to reveal the hidden connections and the hidden things that have been perhaps unsaid or unexplored. That's an extremely powerful technique. Definitely one that I've used with some clients over multiple sessions, where we've taken a photo of the layout of the cards, and then they've gone away and carried on sort of tinkering with it themselves and exploring themselves. And what's really nice about a lot of these projective techniques, the mandala this is true for, the untangler it's true for, the images it's true for. If you've got a situation with somebody where you're concerned about the contracting, the client-coach interaction, the confidentiality aspect, if you're concerned in any way, the client can go away with the tool as is. You're not even having to give them a bunch of questions to consider, because we all know how difficult that is to stay focused on something like that. But you can give them something tangible, like a drawing that they've done. They can take away, they can work on it more, they can reflect on it more in their own time, in their own privacy, in their own space, without having to interact with anyone. So in terms of that, letting the client sort of come to terms with, rest with it, settle with it, whatever's come out from the conversation. We're not just asking the client, we'll go away and reflect on it. That's a bit vague. We can give the client a very tangible framework that they can have to do that. That's been created within the session that you've had with them. So I find that's a very powerful thing to do as well. So there's the untangler, and also there's a 3 circles technique, which is what we are going to explore next. So again, very simple technique. You're going to be drawing for this one. So hopefully you've all got a notepad and a piece of paper, or maybe a wall and a crayon, or something similar. What I'd like you to do is take a blank piece of paper, page in your notebook, whatever, it doesn't matter whether there's lines on it or not, makes no difference. So take a blank piece of paper and your pen or pencil, and I'm going to ask you to draw 3 pictures on your piece of paper, and I'm going to ask you to do that right now. So draw the 3 circles anywhere on the paper, any size you like, but the 3 circles are going to represent 3 things. They're going to represent you, your team, whatever your team means to you, and the organisation that you work for, whatever that means to you. So 3 circles anywhere on the page, any size, that represent you, your team, and your organisation. Then underneath the link to the projective image generator, you'll see there's a link that says questions to ask in the 3 circles exercise. And that will bring up a page with the instructions and some ideas of things to explore, because rather than asking sort of questions, coaching-y kind of questions, you're going to be asking questions only about the layout of the drawing. You're not going to be asking questions particularly about what's contained within it in terms of the meaning, but more the size of the circles relative to each other, where they are on the page, the shape of the circles. Are they actually circles or are they not? Do their lines cross over a little bit like this? So have they drawn more than a circle, or have they drawn a bit less than a circle? This is an interesting question to ask. If they were to imagine movement, would the circles be pulling themselves together? Are they pushing each other apart? Are they growing? Are they shrinking? And just to explore how this relates to the area that they're interested in exploring. So you'll find those instructions and questions on that page that I've linked to. So for now, we're going to pop you into the breakout rooms again, in pairs again, hopefully. And I'll see you all again in 10 minutes. Right then, time to wrap up. So hopefully you can see the 3 images that I showed you earlier on. As you look at these images again, what are you noticing that you didn't notice when you first saw them? And in particular, what aspects of yourself are you seeing reflected back to you? And how does this encourage you to explore these aspects further? So you might see opportunities for change or growth. You might see the idea of time running out, or going on a journey, or accepting your place in the spotlight, fulfilling your potential, that sort of thing. Something completely different. You might look beyond the screen and just take a moment to stop looking at the screen and look at the room around you, and look at the room right now and see how you've created the room that you're in as an external representation of your internal reality. How you create your workspace, where you put your to-do list, where you put your sticky notes. These are all projective aspects where you are creating a physical reality from what's going on inside your mind. You might notice how the space you create around yourself is a form of communication. What you wear, what you have in your background for Zoom calls, what you have in front of you that nobody else can see. All of these were placed by you with intention, and even these are a useful source of information to explore. So in coaching, as I said earlier, we're often forced through training or expectation to limit ourselves to a very cognitive conversation. And our experience, I'm just going to stop the screen share. There we go. So yeah, in coaching we're often forced through training or expectation to limit ourselves to that cognitive conversation. Our experience of life, our fears, our hopes, our dreams can't necessarily be defined in that limited way. And when we can't or we won't put an experience into words, we need other methods to tap into the complex, the diverse ways that your human mind weaves together your rich tapestry of life. When we give our clients a blank canvas, they will create a self-portrait. Doesn't matter whether you think you're an artist or you're terrible at drawing, you will express onto that something that is representative of you. Through that projected representation, we open up this whole new world. We expand the coaching conversation into a relationship. We share creatively. Maybe you participate in the creative process with the client. But when you see that creative process going on, that subjective expression going on, and you are aware of your own interpretations as being different to those of the client, that at the very least is signaling to you that you're putting something of yourself into that coaching relationship. You can't not. You're human at the end of the day. That is why you're doing the job that you do. That's why you embarked on this journey as a coach. But at the same time, you don't want to impose that on the client. And I find these techniques are a really valuable way of floating all that to the surface so that you can choose how to deal with it. So as much as that shared creative process is freeing and inspiring for our clients, I think there's perhaps something more important taking place too, which is that by sharing in the process of co-creating this experience of life, we are equally freeing and inspiring ourselves as coaches. And surely to be free and to be inspired is what draws us to this work. And it offers a glimpse of your own limitless potential, perhaps a glimpse that you'll continue to explore and create on your own magical canvas. So please do explore the resources on the webpage, all the free resources, the tools and the background information and so on. I'm going to run a Projective Coaching Masterclass sometime next year, so if you join the mailing list you'll get some news about that. If you've got any questions or anything you want to share or ask following today's session, then just get in touch. There's a contact form on the website, so do use that to get in touch. As I said, join the mailing list for more knowledge sharing, free resources, ideas to help you develop your coaching practice. Thank you so much for joining me today. And do make the most of the rest of the conference and create for yourself a wonderful day. Thank you so much.